first thing is that the width of our pattern, or the width of our bag, is going to be 13.5 inches wide. Next, the height of the bag is going to be 12 inches high. And then the gusset on the side is going to be 3.25 inches wide. We're working with a full piece of paper. So from this point going forward, we're going to be working with half. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to score the piece of paper. And again, we're going to be using that tool that I showed you earlier called an awl. Now, depending if you guys are using regular paper or you're not using something heavy like I'm using, this is actually called Oaktag. You may not need these tools, that's why I said that they were optional. But since I am using a heavy paper, and something like this, makes a line, an indentation in the paper makes it easier to fold, that's why I'm going to be using this. And again, like I said, if you guys are just using regular paper or pattern paper, you won't need this. So let's get started. So the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to just kind of figure out the half mark of this. So this piece of paper just happens to be about 14 inches wide. So I'm going to make a mark for the center, which is 7. So the first thing I'm going to do is just make a line down the center of the piece of paper. And I'm going to use this awl. So again, when you're using the awl, if you guys do decide to use Oaktag paper, the idea is not to use so much pressure that you're cutting through. You just want to use a little bit of pressure and glide through. So you're not trying to separate the paper. So what you're going to end up with is a line, and I know you guys can't see this, but just look at how nicely the paper folds in half. And again, that's what we call scoring the paper. So again, just want to remind you guys, we're working on half now. So all the dimensions and measurements that I gave you guys earlier are all now going to be on the half, because we're just working with half of the paper. And then when we open it up, it'll mirror, and then it'll give you half. So the first thing that we're going to do, like I said, is just score it and get it so that it's flat. All right, so for the first dimension that we want to work with, we just want to make sure that the bottom of our paper is completely square. And so in order to do that, the way that they showed us in school was that you want to line up your pattern so that it is completely square, and that's again how you're going to get the most accurate results. So the first thing that I do is I just make a mark somewhere along the bottom, and it doesn't have to be too crazy, but just maybe 1/4 inch up, and I just stick my awl all the way through. And this is one of the instances where you're going to poke all the way through, and what that does is it makes a hole all the way straight through. And then you'll see now why I want to use that or do that. So let me just push these things to the side. So you're going to open up your piece of paper. You're going to take your metal ruler. And so whenever I'm cutting, I always use the metal ruler. And like I said, the thing about that is we're going to be using an X-Acto knife. And I think when you use plastic with X-Acto knife, it's just not a good combination. You often end up cutting into the plastic, which we don't want. So that's why I said, that's why I was suggesting to get the metal ruler. So first thing we're going to do is we are going to take our awl and insert that into the hole at one of the ends, and just slide our metal ruler up against that. Next, we're going to then stick the awl in the second hole, and then get this so that your ruler is completely straight, and that's how you know it's straight. And you kind of hear this popping sound. I'm sure you guys can hear that, where you're going from point to point. And when you slide your awl along your metal ruler, that's how you know that you are completely straight. So put that to the side, take your X-Acto knife, and then at that point you can just cut all the way straight through. And then we'll put that to the side. And what that does essentially is it gives you a completely straight line, which is what we want. So again, folding this back on half, and then grabbing our plastic ruler. The first measurement that we want to try to look at and tackle is the width of our bottom. So the width of our bottom, or I should say the width of our gusset, or the side, is going to be 3 1/4. So because the width of our gusset is 3 1/4, we need to add that to the bottom edge of this bag. So what we need to do is take half of that so that as the bag wraps around, we have enough distance to cover that. So the first thing we're going to do is just measure up again from the bottom 1 5/8. And again, this is why I suggest getting the plastic ruler. It just makes your life easier. And then we're just going to cross and make a line. Next, we're going to measure the total height of the bag. So the total height of the bag, as I said, is 12 inches. So from that mark that we just made, we're going to measure up a total of 12 inches and then make another mark. Okay, and then from that 12-inch mark, we want to just take that all the way across the top of our pattern that we're building, and just bring that all the way across. So again, all you have is your 1 5/8 mark on the bottom so far, and then you've got another one that's 12 inches high. Now, here's a measurement that I'm going to give you guys. So now we're talking about the top edge of your bag. So we're going to say, you know, with our hands and wanting to get in and out of it, we want the opening of our bag to be 10 inches wide. So because we're working with half the pattern, we're going to measure out 5 inches. So that's the first thing. So we're going to measure along that top edge 5 inches. And we're going to make a mark. Now, we want to talk about, like I said, the width of the bag. So the total width of the bag is going to be 13 1/2 inches wide. And so half of that is going to be inches wide. So what we're going to do is, you know, pretty much anywhere, but I'm just going to use this bottom line. We're going to measure 6 3/4 wide. Okay? And then from that point, we're just going to use our ruler and line it up and go straight up. And we're going to line up with the line that we made up at the top. And that is going to give us our total distance for the side. So basically what we made is just a huge box. Now, for the side gusset, so this is going to be our side now, I determined that, you know, I think 9 inches is going to be a good height for us. And I'm using that particular dimension because I think if you're putting a piece of paper in there, or a laptop, or, you know, your tablet or something like that in your bag, I think 9 inches is a pretty good depth for your bag. So from there, we're going to measure up, again, not the line on the bottom, but the line right here. So, you know, you're measuring up your 1 5/8 line. So from there up, we're going to measure 9 inches. And we're going to make a mark. Okay? So now we're going to do a little bit of connect the dots. So along the top edge, remember we measured to 5. So from 5 to that 9-inch mark, we're going to make a straight line. So from there to there. Okay? And that basically pretty much completes our pattern. This is going to be our front and our back. So what we want to do now is we just want to do some cutting and get this all trimmed up, and this is going to become our master pattern. So before we move on, what I just want to do is I'm going to make some dimensions in red. You guys won't need to do this, but I'm just going to put them in red so that you guys can see exactly what you guys need to accomplish. So we've cut our pattern out, and basically what we've got here is a full front and back pattern. So hopefully you guys can see that. So again, our distance on the side has been cut, our little slant has been cut, and the top. And so as I said, our dimensions are 5 inches along the top, 6 3/4, and then the side, not including the bottom, is going to be 9 inches, and then the bottom portion is 1 5/8. So just so you see it, that is what we've got. All right, beautiful. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to mark this pattern so that we know that we're dealing with what we call the master. So we're just going to call this master, front, and back. Okay, and the reason why we're calling it a master is because when we go ahead a few steps forward and we put seam allowance on it, we're going to then call that our working pattern. And we definitely want to keep our master pristine and clean, because we're going to make our facings based off the master. So you might be wondering, well, why don't you just put the seam allowance on it now? Not a good idea, because if we need to make any changes or adjustments, it's easier to go back to the master and just deal with the master in its basic measurements than trying to deal with a pattern that has seam allowance in it and make adjustments. Okay, so now let's work on the side. So I cut a piece of paper. It doesn't have to be anything in particular, but definitely wider than what we know that our side is going to be. And as I said before, the width of our side is 3 1/4. So basically what I'm going to do, let me just set this to the side. I'm just going to score the I keep saying the pattern, I mean the paper. I'm just going to score the paper in half and get that straightened out so we can work with it and fold it in half. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we are going to make the shape of the bottom, or basically how we want it. And this is completely arbitrary. So I'm just going to take a look and figure, you know, I kind of want it to be like that. You know, have a really nice rounded shape to this. And again, like I said, this is for the side. So I want it approximately like that. That looks good to me. So what I'm going to do next is I'm just going to cut that out. Face the other side. Let's keep it clean. Fold it. And then mark off how we want it to be. Okay? So the other thing that we want to check is we want to just check the width of the piece of paper that we're working with. And so what we agreed upon is that since we're working with half of it, the width of our gusset is going to be 1 5/8. So the easiest way to really deal with that is to just line up your ruler, and luckily for me, the piece of paper I cut is pretty much there on the money, and just draw a line up. All right, so now we're just going to cut that. Going to, again, this is your bottom, here's your center of your pattern piece, you're going to get these lined up flush with each other, because that's where they're going to meet when they're cut out into pieces. And then you're just going to stab your side and just rotate it a little bit until it touches again with this. And this is called walking the pattern. And we're going to walk it around, make another stab, walk it around a little bit more, make another stab, walk it a little bit more, stab it, and you basically just want to keep shifting this so that until it lines up with your master. Make another mark. And then from the rest of this on, it's straight. So if you can see that, we don't need to do any more walking because it's now completely straight. So all we need to do now is just make a little mark. And basically what that does is it gives us a completely rounded shape that we know is going to fit inside of here, because our bag is going to curve, but it's flat now. Our shape is already curved because we're going to form the front and the back to the shape of this. So again, we just walked it around and now we've got our mark. So put that to the side. We're going to fold this in half, make our mark with our awl, stab that in there. You know, I love to stab it. And get that all straightened out so that it is straight and even. And then we'll discard that piece. And so this is now our side master pattern. And we know that it's going to fit perfectly to this shape because we basically walked it around. And then we're just going to put some markings on it so we know exactly what it's called. Grab my pen, and we're going to call this side master. And there you got it. Now let's move on with putting the seam allowance. Okay, so moving on to the front and the back. So we're just going to basically, again, we're going to take another piece of paper and just make sure that it's wide enough for our pattern to lay on top of, our master pattern. So we're just going to open it up, make sure it's all good. It looks like there's plenty of room on all sides. And then what we're going to do, as we always do, is we are going to score the paper. Fold. Take our folded master, line that up on the sides, just like that. Trace on my pencil. There it goes. On the pencil, and just trace it on all sides. Super easy. Okay, set that to the side. And then again, we're going to be adding 3/8 inch of seam allowance to all sides. this is now our working pattern, because we've added seam allowances to the top, this slant, the sides, and the bottom. So we'll call it working pattern, and this is the front, this is the back, and it's also the bottom. So make sure we put that on there too. I didn't last time, but I probably will go back and add that. So that's what we've got there. So that, my lovelies, is our front and back. So we're getting pretty close, like we're almost there. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to make the facings and the lining. To the top, and again, it's so much easier if you have a plastic ruler. I can't impress upon you guys enough. Please do invest in getting one. Let's do the side. Like that, and then the bottom, and then if you guys can see this, again, another reason to use a plastic ruler, you can just look through and see where the 3/8 inch mark is. Shift your ruler a little bit, make another mark, shift, make another mark, shift, make another mark, shift, make another mark, shift it around, make your last mark. And then you can roughly see right here where your line needs to be in order to hit 3/8 consistently. And then you just connect the dots. Smooth that out, and that's it. Alright, so then let's just cut that out. So just so I know that I've added seam allowance and I don't get confused, I just use my eraser and take out kind of like where this kind of indicates, those little dash lines indicates sewing. And so even though we're not going to be sewing this bag on the sides, we are going to be attaching chain, but we might want to make this bag again and might want to sew it. So we're just going to use those lines. Because you just never know what we're going to do in the future. So for this one, this is our side. So, but this is our working pattern because we've added seam allowance. So we're going to call this working pattern. Side. Okay. So again, we added 3/8 to the top edge, 3/8 to the side, and 3/8 to the bottom. Pretty straightforward. And that's how we're going to do our sides. Now let's move on to the front back. So what we're going to do is we're going to trace it off as we did before. This is the master. And then an easy So there we've got that. So now what we want to do, the facing for the side gusset. So same thing, take our piece, fold it in half, lay it down on the side, and we're just going to use the same piece of paper. You might have to use a different piece of paper depending on what you guys used for the previous, but I'm able to use the same piece of paper. So just trace around. all sides. And again, don't worry about the length on this one, but just trace it around. So remember, when we did our facing for the front back, we had 2 inches. So we're going to have the same thing for the side gusset. So you're going to measure down 2 inches, make a mark, and then we're going to make a line straight through. And that basically means that our sides will add up. Then again, go back in and okay. And also then don't forget to put 3/8 along the bottom so that everything matches up. And that's pretty much it. So that means, and again, we put everything on the fold, as you can see. So we're just going to cut that out and cut this out. And then I'll be right back. So we're back with our cutouts for our facing. So this is our full facing, as you can see that. And this is our side. So basically all we want to do is we just want to mark these with the correct information. So this one is our front, back, facing. And this is our side, our side facing. And that's what we cut. And that's it. Outside. When you just think of the bag on the inside, since you have a facing that you're going to be putting in there and you're adding lining, that means this much, as I showed you in the materials that we're going to use, our facing is going to be in leather. And then the bottom half of it is going to be in fabric. So we've already figured out the top part of it. Now we need to figure out the bottom. So what we need to do is figure out how to make lining to extend through the bottom, extend from underneath the facing to the bottom. So that's basically what we're trying to figure out now. And so since we're going to do that, meaning adding lining to the front and the back, we also need lining for this. So I'm just going to real quickly show you how we can mark this off, add in the seam allowance, and have the information that we need to make the lining. So I'll just put this to the side. So going back to our master pattern. So if you remember, when we made our facings, they were 2 inches long. So now with a different color, just so that you guys can see it, along this edge, we're going to measure down. I'll just put my ruler around here. We're going to measure down 2 inches and make a mark. And then we're going to make a cross mark for that. And I'm doing this mainly so that, you guys can see, get this open, how I'm manipulating this pattern, and then it'll make sense to you what you guys need to do in order to do yours. So then we've got that, and that's our purple mark. And then we're going to call this 2-inch facing. You guys can see that purple mark right there. Okay, so same thing with our side. We need 2 inches on that one as well. So again, we're just going to measure down 2 inches on the side, make a mark, and then open it up and go 2 inches across. And I'll make the mark again in purple. Okay. So now everything that is below the purple mark, if you guys can see, purple mark needs to be lining. So we're just, again, now that we know where we need to come to and what we need to kind of figure out and shape, all we have to do is just copy it off. So let's do that. So there's just a couple of little small details we want to add to the pattern. So do you remember that washer? Hopefully you guys can see that. So this is the little piece that goes with the snap. We're going to use this as a guide. So measuring up about 1.5 inches from the seam allowance, we're just going to make a mark. And then we're going to take our washer, and then if you notice there's a hole right in the center, we're going to place that hole right in the center of that mark and get it balanced so that it sits right there. And then we're going to take our contrast pen and mark right around the edge of that. And so that's just going to remind us exactly where on our facing, when we do our facing, y'all can see that, where we're going to place our snap. So just want to make sure we don't forget about that. Put that to the side. The thing I'm putting in my pocket is my cell phone. So I want my cell phone to fit really nicely in there so that I can pull it in and out. And because we only have this much space, right? So this is kind of what we're dealing with. It doesn't really make, we could put the cell phone in, we could put it in portrait style, which is up and down, or we could put it in landscape. I think landscape is going to make more sense. So just keeping that in mind, that's where, where I kind of, made some design decisions. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a piece of paper, as we always do, and just score this in half. party people, what's going on? All right, so we are down to the finished, almost finished, so super close, finishing up this pattern. So there's just a couple of things that I just want to mention to you guys, and this is about housekeeping. And when I say housekeeping, I don't mean cleaning up your own house or your own apartment or your own room for that matter. I'm really just talking about the pattern. So just a couple of things I just want to mention to you. So the first thing, as we go through these patterns, what we want to do is we want to separate them and put them into stacks. Because I think when they're separated and they're stacked, they make it a little bit easier to understand what's going on and what you need to do next. So let's just separate out the patterns. We've got our side. So now the masters we try to keep pristine. So we, once we're done working with them, we don't cut them up, we don't put extra marks or manipulate them in any way once our masters are finished. So we're just going to stack these together and put this to the side and have for yourselves represents the front, the back, and the bottom. Because remember, as I said before, we're going to be putting a seam. Let's see, I'll just turn this around for you guys. We're going to be putting a seam into the bottom, and that's why we have a front and a back, which at this point you guys should all be pretty clear on that. But I just wanted to show it to you anyway. So we've got that, and then we've got our side. So I'm going to put those together because these two represent what we're going to use for the outside material. And so in terms of housekeeping, this is what I mean. We're just going to put some additional information on these patterns to make sure that they're 100% clear what we're supposed to do with them, and that we can avoid any kind of confusion. Because there's nothing worse than having some leather or something, that material that you've invested quite a bit of money in, or you just put money into it anyway, and then you have to recut because you did something wrong. And I think this is one way that we can kind of help to avoid any kind of confusion. So we've got that. Next up, we've got our facings. And so remember, as I said before, and also showed you before, the facing is going to be in a contrast leather, different from the outside, also different from the lining. And as I said before, the facing is that piece that if you look down into the bag, that you're going to see that goes around the top edge. And so we've got a front and back for that. And then remember, we also have a side, because we have that side gusset that we made. So we've got that. So put that to the side. Those are your facings. Next up and last up, we have all the things that we're going to use for lining. So we've got, remember how we've got remember the part that I showed you? This is the part we're going to be using for the lining. So this is the bottom half of the bag. So the bottom half of the bag is going to be lining, as we discussed. And then we're going to take this top piece, which is in leather, and we're going to sew that to the lining. And it'll all make sense once we cut everything out, and then you'll be able to see what I mean. So just want to make sure that we've got that. But again, because we're going to be using lining material for this, we want to stack these pieces with the lining, with the rest of the lining patterns. So we've got that. Then we've got our side. And then we also have our lining. So our lining pocket. And so remember, we decided earlier, previously in the video, that we were going to make our pocket out of lining. So you're going to have 3 pieces for your lining. So remember those binder clips that we had earlier? Now is a good time to get out those binder clips, because what we want to do is we want to stack everything together so that we know what needs to go. So we've got all that, and then I just take my binder clip, clip it, and then we have our master, just in case we ever need to look at that, which we really won't unless we're going to do something more with the pattern in the future, which hopefully maybe we will, but right now for this particular tutorial we're not. So I also just clip that and put that to the side. Well, party people, that is it. We are done. The pattern making component of this particular tutorial. Congratulations for making it this far. Without further ado, we can go to